Welcome to a depressing episode of the Oasis of Knowledge. Dear, why are you smiling? My friend, I follow the school of the artist Hassan al-Asmar. Sad words, happy melody, and an unusual state of smiling and joy. The audience listens to Hassan al-Asmar's songs, not knowing what to feel. His psyche is sad, but his body is on the beat. Today, my friend, we will talk about a tragic event that the United States of America did and was not held accountable for. Listen, Truman. You who gave Oppenheimer the handkerchief and said to him, "Go wipe your hands. I was the one who threw the bomb. I remember, I saw the movie." My friend, this was a dose of joking because we will dive into depression followed by depression. Let's go.
The Oasis of Knowledge.
On the morning of August 6, 1945, the American Enola Gay plane dropped in the middle of Hiroshima, 580 meters from the surface, a metal object 3 meters long containing 64 kilograms of uranium. This object was called the Little Boy Bomb, but, my friend, in fact, as you know today, it was not a little boy at all. This was the first atomic bomb in history. The moment it explodes, life will change completely in the 7th largest city in Japan, which will become a part of hell. And one of the biggest tragedies in history will begin, known as the Hiroshima tragedy. That morning, a large number of Hiroshima residents were in the streets, going to work or school, participating in expanding roads in preparation for a possible American invasion. Some of them noticed the plane, Enola Gay, which was a B-29. Some of them saw it in the sky. The plane was walking and strutting in the sky of the city. The truth is, no one cared that much. They thought, a plane like any other plane. Very few people could understand that this was an American plane. Also, the raid sirens did not go off. Even if it was a raid, it would never be a single pilot. Usually, a huge squadron of planes would bomb the city, not one plane, and they would drop hundreds of bombs. You'd see rain. Also, Hiroshima, unlike other cities in Japan, had never experienced raids before. In a way, many of the city's residents were convinced that it would remain safe. It is impossible for the Americans to ever bomb Hiroshima. This is because a large number of Japanese immigrants to America are originally residents of Hiroshima. That's all besides a famous rumor at the time saying President Truman's aunt lived in Hiroshima. This rumor was very widespread among the people, thus no one was interested in this plane. At exactly 8:15, my friend, the bomb was dropped, specifically on a hospital called Shima. Suddenly, a dazzling light radiated across the city of Hiroshima, a light like the flash of a million cameras. It was all in the morning as well, as if you were seeing day above day. As described by the survivors who were 8 kilometers away from the explosion point, they said that they felt as if they were looking into the sun. Light as I saw in Oppenheimer, without any sound in less than a second, a fireball formed with a diameter of up to 250 meters. Its temperature ranged from 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius, a ball that devoured all the air around it. Its flames burned everyone within 3,000 meters. This ball, my friend, killed 70,000 people in one moment. Most of them died without understanding what was happening and realizing it was their last moment of life. Some of them evaporated from the surface of the earth, and nothing remained in their place except their shadow. In a phenomenon known as nuclear shadows, Shima Hospital, where the nuclear bomb fell, disappeared with those who were in it. Nothing remained of them at all. The next moment, a terrible explosion wave erupted. Every building's glass in the city within a 2-kilometer radius was destroyed. Let me tell you, the glass of houses 16 kilometers away from the bomb was destroyed. People felt the bomb from 60 kilometers away. In an instant, the city's residents who were left alive found themselves in the middle of a storm of flying building blocks. Blocks that were on fire and taking out everything in front of them. Some estimates say that these inflamed lumps caused 30% of the deaths and injuries. Then suddenly the wave ended and calm prevailed over the city of Hiroshima. But it was not the calm of the end. Rather, it was the calm of the beginning of the tragedy. The first thing the residents of Hiroshima faced after the bomb was fire. The fireball caused a huge fire that reached every place in Hiroshima. The fire doubled its spread and strength, fueled by strong winds over the city, spreading fire everywhere. And at the moment when Hiroshima was burning, thousands were emerging from under the rubble, trying to understand what was happening. Tens of thousands of people rising from the rubble like zombies. They walked out in the middle of a whole city that was burning. Most of them had terrible burns, of course. None of them understood anything. Many of them were difficult to recognize their features after the fire burned much of their faces. They all had one goal in mind: to reach any of the city's rivers quickly because of the immense heat they felt, to ease a little the flames of their burning bodies. When they reached the river, they saw an unpleasant surprise. The rivers had also turned into fire because of the blocks of wood that flew from the burned houses, the houses that were on the banks of rivers. Here, tens of thousands of human beings crowded together, wanting somewhere to put their burning bodies. All this in the middle of fire, burnt wood, demolished houses, and the smell of smoke. Around these people, thousands of burned or floating corpses. Many of the people who jumped into the river from the bridge didn't know how to swim. They just went down to escape from the fire. When they went down, they did not come up. They drowned to death. Other people got into water tanks and swimming pools, crowded in, and because of how tired and weak their bodies were, they couldn't get out, and they drowned. Everyone was looking for help, but who helps whom? Everyone had their own tragedy, and the savior was the victim, and whoever you tried to seek help from, you would find that they themselves were in need of help. That, if you found anyone too. The world turned into a bright flash, a super-hot blast. In an instant, the city of Hiroshima was engulfed in a blinding light, hotter than the sun. The sheer force of the explosion flattened buildings, shattered windows, and sent debris flying in all directions. Then quiet, a scary quiet, with only the sound of falling ash. The once bustling city was now eerily silent, as if time itself had stopped. The air was thick with soot and the remnants of what was once a thriving metropolis. Hiroshima, a busy city just moments ago, was now destroyed, covered in smoke and dust. Streets that were filled with life and activity were now unrecognizable, buried under layers of ash and debris. The skyline, once dotted with buildings, was now a jagged silhouette of ruins. From the sky, a weird, oily rain started to fall, black and thick, carrying the dust of the destroyed city and something much worse, radioactive fallout. This black rain, a mix of soot, ash, and radioactive particles, coated everything it touched, seeping into the ground and contaminating the water. People who hid from the heat came out, blinking, into a changed world. Their faces were marked with shock and disbelief as they tried to comprehend the devastation around them. The landscape they once knew was now a scene of utter desolation. Buildings were broken, people were trapped under the pieces. The cries for help echoed through the ruins as survivors desperately tried to free those trapped beneath the rubble. The destruction was so widespread that it seemed impossible to find a single structure left intact. Fires burned everywhere, destroying everything. The flames consumed what little was left, turning the ruins into a hellish landscape. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke made it difficult to breathe. The air smelled like burning flesh and wood, a terrible smell sticking to everyone. Alive or dead, this acrid odor permeated the air, a constant reminder of the horror that had unfolded. It clung to the survivors, a haunting scent that would stay with them forever. And through it all, the black rain fell, a silent, invisible killer going into wounds, poisoning the water and the air. This rain, laden with radioactive particles, was a new and insidious threat. It seeped into open wounds, causing infections and further suffering. The survivors, many badly burned and hurt, walked through the streets, confused about what happened. Their skin was charred, their clothes in tatters, and their minds in a state of shock. They wandered aimlessly, searching for loved ones, for help, for answers. They looked like ghosts in a city of ghosts, their cries lost in the disaster. The once vibrant community was now a haunting tableau of silent, suffering figures. The weight of the tragedy was almost too much to bear. Their world, the world of busy markets and friendly faces, was gone, now a nightmare of ash and ruins. The familiar sights and sounds of daily life had been replaced by a grim reality, a stark reminder of the destructive power of the bomb. Scared and following their instincts, the survivors started to leave the destroyed city. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning flesh. The once vibrant city was now a wasteland, a haunting reminder of the devastation that had occurred. They walked through the broken streets, their bodies hurting, their minds numb. Each step was a struggle, as the ground beneath them was littered with debris and the remnants of their former lives. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sob or the distant sound of collapsing buildings. Many were badly burned, their skin hanging off, their faces blistered. The pain was unbearable, yet they continued to move forward, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The sight of their injuries was a stark contrast to the vibrant lives they once led. Others had cuts from flying pieces, deep wounds that bled a lot. Makeshift bandages torn from their own clothing were the only thing keeping them from bleeding out. Each wound told a story of the chaos and destruction that had unfolded. They moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes empty, their faces showing shock. The trauma of what they had witnessed was etched into their expressions, a permanent reminder of the horrors they had endured. They were ghosts of their former selves, wandering through the ruins of their city. Mothers held their hurt children, their faces covered in tears and soot. The children, too young to understand the full extent of the tragedy, clung to their mothers, seeking comfort in the midst of chaos. The bond between mother and child was a small beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. Old people, everything they owned turned to ash, stumbled, using sticks as canes. Their frail bodies struggled to keep up, but they pressed on, driven by a determination to survive. The weight of their years and the burden of their losses were heavy, but they refused to give up. They were like a parade of the lost, changed by the horrible things they saw. Each person carried with them the memories of the life they once knew, now shattered by the events that had transpired. They were united in their suffering, a collective testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The hurt people cried for water, their voices rough from thirst and pain. The intense heat and the physical exertion had left them dehydrated, their bodies desperate for relief. The scarcity of water added another layer of suffering to their already dire situation. But there wasn't much water, and what was left was dirty and had radiation. The few sources of water they found were contaminated, a cruel twist of fate that turned their lifeline into a source of further harm. The knowledge of the radiation only added to their despair. The lucky ones drank from puddles, their thirst gone for a little bit, not knowing about the poison they drank. In their desperation, they ignored the potential dangers, focusing only on the immediate need to quench their thirst. The temporary relief was a small mercy in their ongoing struggle. The unlucky ones just fell down, sick from thirst and radiation, their cries for help lost in the quiet of the city. The combination of physical exhaustion, dehydration, and radiation sickness was too much for some to bear. Their final moments were marked by a haunting silence, a stark contrast to the chaos that had brought them to this point. Far away in the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, news of the Hiroshima bombing caused confusion and disbelief. The serene and majestic palace, a symbol of Japan's enduring legacy, was now a place of turmoil. The officials, who had always carried themselves with an air of confidence, were now seen whispering in hushed tones, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty. The destruction was so big, so new, that no one understood it. The once bustling city of Hiroshima was now a landscape of ruins and ashes. Buildings that had stood for decades were reduced to rubble in an instant. The sheer scale of the devastation was beyond comprehension, leaving the people in a state of shock and disbelief. Early reports talked about a new kind of bomb, a super-powerful weapon, but it took time to learn how bad it really was. Newspapers and radio broadcasts struggled to convey the magnitude of the event. The term atomic bomb was new and terrifying, and its implications were not yet fully understood by the general public. Whispers of the attack went through the palace, carried by worried officials. The corridors, usually filled with the sounds of confident footsteps and decisive voices, were now filled with murmurs of fear and uncertainty. The gravity of the situation was sinking in, and the officials knew that their world had changed forever. The emperor in his palace heard the news quietly, his face not showing his feelings. His expression remained stoic, a mask of calm in the face of chaos. But behind those eyes there was a storm of emotions. The weight of the nation's fate rested heavily on his shoulders, and he knew that difficult decisions lay ahead. The military leaders in secret meetings argued, their voices filled with anger, fear, and disbelief. The room was charged with tension as they debated their next move. Some called for retaliation while others urged caution. The realization that their once mighty empire was vulnerable to such a devastating attack was a bitter pill to swallow. Some hoped the damage wasn't that bad, trying to stay positive against this new, scary enemy. They clung to the belief that Japan could still rise from the ashes, that this was just a temporary setback. Their optimism was a fragile shield against the harsh reality that was beginning to set in. Others with serious faces knew the truth. Japan, once thought to be unbeatable, had been defeated by one bomb. The realization was a heavy burden, a stark contrast to the unwavering confidence they once had. The bomb had not only destroyed a city, but had also shattered the illusion of invincibility that had surrounded the Japanese military. Their world had changed, and the future seemed dark and uncertain. The skies over Tokyo mirrored the mood of the nation, dark and foreboding. The streets, once filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life, were now somber and quiet. The people, their faces marked by worry and uncertainty, braced themselves for what was to come. The future was a blank canvas, and the only certainty was that it would be painted with colors. One of the hospitals that survived the bombing and was not subjected to major damage was the Transportation Authority Hospital. One of its doctors was Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, who was interested in monitoring what was happening and writing it in his diary. After that, it would become a very important reference to know what happened. What makes, my friend, these remarks so important is that between 300 doctors, which is the number of doctors in all of Hiroshima, only 28 doctors survived. One of them was this doctor, who provided in his diary an accurate description and important observation of events. How, for example, did the first traces of radiation appear? The first trace of radiation appeared when suddenly the infected people relieved themselves dozens of times per night. Unfortunately, some of the patients needed to go to the bathroom more than 50 or 60 times. Their feces were all blood, and no one understood why it was happening. The initial belief was that this was often dysentery, and doctors began isolating everyone who showed these symptoms. As the second day passed, stranger symptoms began to appear. People started coming to the hospital with strange blisters on their skin, and they had bleeding gums. The strange thing is that these people survived the bombing. Their burns were minor if they were injured at all. These people were supposed to be okay, but over time, symptoms began to develop. Their temperature began to increase, they experienced severe fatigue, and they vomited blood. Within a day or two, they died. The doctors, my friend, did not understand. These people were supposed to have survived the bombing. What happened to them to die like this? After 4 or 5 days, new symptoms began to appear, purple spots on the skin that do not hurt but are itchy. Their skin eats them to scratch it. This was a very important sign because anyone who had these spots died after 2 or 3 days. Hiroshima had become a city of terrified people, a city where people took off their clothes every now and then, looking to see if there were stains or not. If the answer was, there are no spots, this meant that their life extended at least one more day. A new day of life, but it was also a new day of anxiety if these spots would appear on their body later. A new day in a life with a completely unknown fate. But if the answer was, yes, there are spots on your back, this meant certain death. All that, my friend, the doctors were at a loss because they had never seen symptoms like this before.